How can the wine world help tackle climate change, and why is choosing sustainable and biodynamic wines not enough? What happens when vineyards embrace biodiversity with cover crops, insects, and wildlife? And how are wine producers in South Africa rebuilding natural ecosystems around their vineyards? In today's episode, you'll hear the stories and tips that answer those questions in our chat with Andy Neather and Jane Masters. By the end of our conversation, you'll also discover what the link is between science, sustainability, and the future of wine, the challenge of communicating the urgency of climate change without sounding alarmist, how consumers can reduce their environmental impact when choosing wines, the changes happening in the wine industry to improve packaging standards and reduce carbon emissions, what we can learn from the innovations of biodiversity-focused viticulture in other regions, and whether regenerative viticulture can be scaled up for both major producers and boutique wineries. Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 360. So what's new in the wine world this week? Well, the patriotic wine wave that started with the U.S. trade war earlier this year is still cresting strong across Canada, and the numbers from this week tell quite a story. According to data released on October 11th, American spirit exports to Canada absolutely cratered by 85% in the second quarter of 2025, and wine hasn't fared much better. But here's a fascinating twist. While overall wine sales continue to slump as Canadians moderate their drinking or pivot to ready-to-drink cocktails, domestic wines are having an honest-to-goodness moment. The LCBO reported on October 1st that Ontario VQA wines are up 60% since U.S. products were pulled from shelves, with VQA reds and whites growing 71% and 67% respectively. Meanwhile, BC wines have surged 55% at Ontario stores. Nova Scotia wines are up 30%, and Ontario Craft Wineries president Michelle Wachelin told CBC on October 4th that sales across all retail channels have jumped 78%. Restaurants are following suit, and some Ottawa establishments are now reporting Ontario wine sales up 30% since swapping out California bottles. In marketing moves, alternative packaging is having its main character moment this October, and it's not just about sustainability. It's genuinely reshaping how wine reaches consumers. Shanken News Daily reported on October 14th that the industry is going full tilt into aluminum bottles, PET containers, which stands for, and I'm going to mispronounce this, polyethylene terephthalate, paper bottles, and lightweight glass to slash carbon footprints and open up new drinking occasions. Sounds like a real marketing buzzword there. The shift isn't purely environmental, it's strategic. Wineries are betting that someone who'd never crack open a regular glass bottle at a concert or on a hiking trail might happily sip from a can or aluminum bottle, expanding wine beyond the dinner table. And bubbly lovers, mark your calendars. Global Champagne Day is this Friday, October 24th, giving you the perfect excuse to pop some sparkling wine open and toast absolutely nothing in particular. Expect even more sparkle as brands rev up for Champagne Day, blending high glam and high camp. Veuve Clicquot's pink-friendly Dress Up Your Bubbles reels are already grabbing millions of loops this week. So how is the harvest going? Glad you ask. This week brought encouraging reports from major wine regions. France is bouncing back beautifully after last year's disaster. The Agriculture Ministry forecasts 40 to 42.5 million hectoliters for 2025, up a whopping 17% from 2024, with Burgundy, Champagne, and the Loire Valley all recovering nicely from adverse weather. Italy's holding its crown as the world's largest producer, with 47.4 million hectoliters expected. That's the equivalent, by the way, of 6.3 billion bottles, up 8% from last year, according to the estimates. Closer to home, Ontario's 2025 harvest is looking stellar despite summer heat waves and drought-cutting yields. Researchers at Brock University reported on October 2nd that quality is excellent, with slow ripening extending harvest into early November. British Columbia is experiencing what winemakers are calling a remarkable comeback after the 2024 devastating freezes, with ideal growing conditions, generous yields, and harvest wrapping up in mid-October. Nova Scotia's cool climate magic is unfolding right now, with sparkling wine grapes finishing in October and reds coming through in November. And here's a delightful tidbit. England's Rathfinny wine estate deployed an actual squadron of falcons, hawks, and even a Chilean blue eagle, starting in mid-September to guard their ripening grapes from hungry birds, replacing 300 kilometers of plastic netting with nature's own Air Force. Those falcons, by the way, aren't just any birds. We're talking peregrine gyrofalcon hybrids that can hit 200 miles an hour speeds, merlins darting between the vine rows, and a genuinely intimidating Chilean blue eagle keeping pigeons properly terrified. Visitors to the Sussex estate can sip sparkling wine while watching nature's most elegant pest control system in action, which beats the heck out of listening to those propane cannons blasting or those awful squawk boxes that always make me think something has died in the vineyard. All right, something to make you smile. A study is making waves this past week, published October 13th by the research company Boing Boing, and it says that researchers tracked 4,000 wines across 14 wine competitions and found that 1,000 wines won gold medals in one competition but failed to place in others, with only 10% of judges consistently rating identical wines in the same medal range. Personally, I've always felt that wine competitions were akin to the awards given out at kindergarten graduations, where everyone goes home with a prize. And that reminds me that writer Robin Goldstein once created a fake Milan restaurant and submitted a wine list of bottles that the Wine Spectator magazine had previously panned as swampy and like turpentine. And then they gave the non-existent restaurant an award of excellence. Love it. If you have some wine news or a quirky story you think I should share on this podcast, email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com. I'm also sharing wine news and wine reviews on Instagram, where I'm at Natalie McLean Wine, so follow me there, I'll follow you back. If you're listening to this podcast early on Wednesday morning when it's published, join me on City TV's Breakfast Television at 9 a.m. Eastern when we chat about Come Over October, the international movement that's gaining great traction with wine lovers around the planet. Then at 1 p.m., tune in to CTV's The Social when we chat about terrific wines for fall. Both shows are national. Let me know if you'd like to have your brand featured on future TV segments or would like to advertise with us through our podcast, newsletter, website, social media, or mobile apps. If you represent a winery, distillery, brewery, or an agency or regional council representing wine, spirits, cocktails, food, lifestyle, or decor brands, please email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com. Back to today's episode. Two of you are going to win a copy of Andy Neather's and Jane Masters' terrific new book, Rooted in Change, The Stories Behind Sustainable Wine. I have 2 copies also of Dr. Tufi Niedermeyer's book, The Wines of Brazil, to give away. Luc Peraier from Pointe-aux-Trembles, Quebec, has won a copy of Sarah Jane Evans' book, The Wines of Central and Southern Spain from Catalonia to Cadiz. I have 1 copy left to give away. If you'd like to win a copy of any of these books, please email me and let me know that you'd like to win. It doesn't matter where you live. I'll choose 5 winners randomly from those who contact me at natalie@nataliemclean.com. Keep them for yourself or give them as gifts. The holidays are right around the corner. In other bookish news, if you're reading the paperback or ebook or listening to the audiobook of my memoir, Wine Witch on Fire, Rising from the Ashes of Divorce, Defamation, and Drinking Too Much, a national bestseller and one of Amazon's best books of the year, I'd love to hear from you at Natalie@NatalieMcLean.com. I'll put a link in the show notes to all retailers worldwide at NatalieMcLean.com/360. Okie dokie, on with the show. Jane Masters became a Master of Wine in 1997 and was elected as chairman of the Institute of Masters of Wine in September 2016. She is an independent wine consultant with over 30 years of wine experience and clients around the world. She also works with the Majestic Wine Group in the UK. Having originally trained as a winemaker at the Institute of Enology in Bordeaux, Jane worked in wine production in France prior to joining the wine buying team at Majestic, and she has also filmed several wine shows and written sections for Jancis Robinson's Oxford Companion to Wine and Wine Opus. Andrew Neather is a freelance British journalist, a former academic historian, environmental campaigner, political speechwriter, and newspaper journalist. He was the London Evening Standard's wine critic for 10 years. He now blogs weekly on wine and food at A View from My Table, writes a regular column for Tim Atkin's website, and has contributed to publications including The Independent, Harper's, and the Club Enologique. They join us now from London. Welcome, Jane and Andy. So great to have you here with us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Right.
All right, great. So let's just start off with some of your more memorable wine moments before we dive into the book. Jane, tell us about a few times during wine trips when you have crossed paths with celebrities.
Oh, well, I don't travel so much these days, but I used to literally travel around the world nonstop. Many times I've come across different celebrities in different places, in airport lounges. Probably one of the most memorable was actually staying in Buenos Aires in the hotel there. And we arrived, I was with a work colleague, and they said, "Oh, hang on a minute, something funny about your booking," and went off and shuffled a few papers around. They said, "We're moving your rooms. You're moving into the annex." And we was like, why is that? "Oh, because Madonna's here in the hotel and we need, we only people with security ratings can go into that part." So we were then on the floor beneath Madonna, and of course thought it would be quite nice to sneak up there and see if we could actually meet her. So we got the lift up to the next floor, and a great big busty security man sort of saying, "You're not coming in."
I wouldn't let you up there. She was filming Evita?
She was filming Evita at the time, yeah, so it's quite a long time ago now. But yeah, I've come across various other musicians and TV people, and once in a airport lounge in Hong Kong, it was very intriguing. I was sitting, it was a very small lounge actually, and I was just sitting there and I thought, that's Cliff Richard, and it's like, no, it can't be. It can't be. And I just looked up from my book, and someone across the room was saying, "It's him." And then he was having this conversation with his manager about, did the show go all right? I was really, really nervous. And I was thinking, gosh, that's amazing that somebody that chooses to do what he's done it for so long, was still nervous before performances and things. So we're all human after all. So
Yes, that's reassuring. What about traveling in South America?
that's probably not as adventurous as it used to be, but several times in South America, I've arrived late at airports to find the person that was meant to be coming to collect me has not turned up, and I'm sort of there with my big bags and sort of abandoned. On another occasion, I was staying in Santiago. This is going back about 30 years, again with a colleague, thank goodness. And we were due to be picked up on a Sunday afternoon and drive sort of 3 hours south of Santiago. So the guy turned up, we got in the car. Next thing we know is about 20 minutes down on the journey, he pulls over into a side lane, opens the door, this guy gets in, and we're thinking, this is all a bit strange. But of course, neither of us spoke very much Spanish. And the next thing we know is the guy sort of fiddling around, he's getting his gun out, and we're sort of sitting in the back of the car going, are we actually being kidnapped here, or what's going on? So we both sort of sat there looking at each other, but we did get to the winery, and then we learnt afterwards that the guy was actually an off-duty police officer who the chauffeur had asked to accompany him on the journey just in case there were any bandits on the route.
Right. It would have been nice to know that. Yeah.
We made it through.
And Andy, you have also been on many a wine trip. Maybe tell us about the Georgian trip where you had to contend with a food issue.
Well, that's right. I mean, it was just the sheer amount of food. So the Georgians, this was last year, they're very proud of being the cradle of wine. They've been making wine for 8,000 years.
Wow. And we're referring, to, of course, to the country, not the state.
The country, not the state. Yeah, yeah. It's amazing wine, amazing food, but they do serve you, if you're visiting there, 2 banquets a day. And I mean, with multiple courses. And then there'll be sort of snacks. And so the sort of snack you'll get if you're going to visiting a winery sort of late afternoon will be the equivalent of quite a large English meal in and of its own, with kebabs and things, and
Wow.
So yeah, I put on a bit of weight during that trip.
I think quite a few wine regions, wine is part of food and hospitality, and quite often you can get these splendid. Everyone wants to show you the best, don't they?
That's true. Yeah. No, they're very nice.
That's true. All for the cause, Andy. And then another time you were stuck in Lebanon because of the war. Were you actually writing about politics or wine at that time?
That was the first time I was in Lebanon. I was writing about wine, but I had the misfortune. This was the sort of worst timed wine trip ever. I got in on what was actually the last flight into the country. There's been an uprising by Hezbollah against the government that day. This was in 2014. By the time I got there, they'd blockaded the airport. And I showed the immigration officer my passport. He said, "You're a journalist?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "So you're here to cover the situation?" I said, "No, I'm here to write about Lebanese wine. I'm going to Zakhle in the Bekaa Valley." And he said, "You've got a long walk," and handed me back my passport.
Oh.
Anyway, it was a long story, but I did manage to meet various winemakers, including the legendary Serge Oshar of Chateau Musard. I didn't actually make it to any vineyards. And ultimately, I escaped in a taxi. There was only 2 border crossings into Syria left, and Syria was safe at that point. And so I was very glad when I made it in it.
Oh my gosh. And tell us about the wine that stripped paint. You were drinking something that stripped paint?
It's just sort of gone down in family law. In my family, we were once staying in the Dordogne. This is, a long, long time ago. I was in my late teens. The very old guy next door to us, who was in his 90s, he said, "I've got a buddy who makes wine, which is comme ça." And we said, "Okay, great, let's take us to him." And went there. These guys only spoke Occitan, patois, to each other, which is sort of halfway between Spanish and French. We came away with a big, I guess it was like a 5-litre jug of the stuff, and we kept it during the week on a painted tin tray, and there was a bare patch of metal underneath it at the end, and the drips had taken out. We were drinking it all week, obviously.
It's
Not the
great.
worst wine I've ever drunk, I'd have to say, actually. But
Might be Coke can do that.
well, probably, yeah.
Well, let's talk about better wines than that then. So, do you have your book with you?
We don't, unfortunately. It's actually at the printer.
Oh, it's at the printer. Okay.
The actual publishing date is next Wednesday, the 1st.
So people will be able to get it in all the usual places. But imagine you're holding up the book. Now read the title and subtitle to us.
So it's called Rooted in Change, The Stories Behind Sustainable Wine. I guess it does what it says on the tin. It covers all aspects of sustainability across the global wine trade. So everything from growing grapes to making wine to how wine is packaged.
And what drew you to this story in the first place, the two of you?
I became first interested in sustainability through climate change, really. So climate obviously has always had a very important influence over the style of wines and quality of wines that are made and where they can be produced, what grape varieties can grow where. So ever since training as an oenologist in Bordeaux many years ago, we learnt about the impact of climatology, weather patterns, and the impact it had on the grapevine and the grapes that are produced. But at that time, I would say that even the professor that we had of climatology actually mentioned climate change. I can remember this. This is going back a long, long time now, and said, but there's no real scientific consensus that it's happening because it's happening, basically. More and more over in the early 2000s, even earlier than that, people were talking more and more about it. And I got quite interested in just understanding what was going on, trying to not just think about it from a wine point of view, but from a more of a science point of view, I guess. So I guess I read quite a lot of quite dry sort of IPCC reports. And
What's IPCC, dare I ask? Some long committee? Something on the protection of climate?
On climate change. So it's the
Okay.
hundreds of scientists around the world all coming together and sort of looking at that. So that's how it started, really. And then I guess a couple of years ago, I was much more serious about wanting to understand climate change, what was causing it. And that led me into sort of learning about other aspects of sustainability more and more. And, you know, the more you learn, the more there is to learn. And you realize that it's actually quite complicated. Wanted to make it simple. So,
And how about you, Andy?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been very interested in climate change, very concerned about it for, I guess, sort of 25, 30 years. I mean, I was really converted to environmentalism properly when I worked for the campaign group Friends of the Earth. It was in the late 90s, early 2000s, and worked on it then at the time of the Kyoto Treaty and so on. And I was just really struck over the last few years, last sort of 2, 3, 4 years, the incredible concentration of climate disasters that were hitting the wine world. I mean, disastrous fires in, California, Oregon. This year we've had Napa in Oregon, Australia, all sorts of places in Europe.
Canada as well, yes.
Canada, the fires in BC. We've had catastrophic droughts in Europe, most recently in Catalonia, but also, I mean, in Chile has had a mega drought, which is sort of over, but not really, for the last decade or more, really. South Africa. Incredible hail incidents and frost incidents in Europe. People talk about vines being the canary in the coal mine for climate change. It's a very sensitive plant, really. It grows in quite a narrow climatic band, and it really is an indicator. It's one of the first plants to really suffer. And you can see that, and it was seeing that happen in front of me that really made me want to write about this and explain it properly.
And what made the two of you team up? Did someone bring you together, or were you out for drinks and said, let's do it?
Yeah, actually, it was our publisher, Hermione. So we both, over quite a short period of time, happened to be introduced and to meet Hermione. I think you met her first, didn't you?
Yeah.
And then literally a couple of weeks later, I was at a wine event in central London and told her that I was interested in writing, and it started sort of through my own research, sort of putting together ideas for a book. And she said, oh, well, I've just literally met a journalist and we're already working on a project. Would you be interested? And then she spoke to Andy and said the similar thing, I guess. Would you be interested in co-writing? And we said, well, we sort of need to meet each other first and sort of see whether we agree on not everything, but, whether we get on, how we work. She put us in touch. We had a lunch one Saturday afternoon in central London, got on, and sort of things went from there, really.
Now, what did you disagree on? Surely you didn't agree 100% on everything, because there are a lot of sticky issues when it comes to the environment.
I can't really think of anything. The first thing Andy said when he arrived today was is there anything that you can think of that we didn't really agree on? And it's like, no, we are actually fairly consistent in approach. I guess anything that we talked about was where we think, have we got the balance right in the book? Are we being too preachy? Are we being objective? Are we being scientific enough without being over sort of nerdy and scientific? So that's the things that we probably discuss more.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a really good match, actually. And I think essentially we both appreciated each other's skills. We really both brought a sort of unique skill set to this. I mean, Jane knows far more about the science of wine and the science of climate change, come to that, than I do. And on the other hand, I'm a
proper writer.
I'm a professional writer and journalist, and Jane isn't. So we really didn't. I mean, I know I learned from some of the stuff that Jane had written about winemaking, for instance. And I thought I knew a lot about winemaking, but I learned from that. And similarly, about plant biology, for instance, as well.
Yeah, and how did you avoid being too preachy or alarmist and yet make your points deeply enough? Like, how did you strike that balance?
I think it's about looking at the facts and putting things into context and just looking objectively at what is going on. We don't want to be scaremongering or anything, but there is no doubt that climate change is happening. There is no doubt that it is being caused by the way in which we as a human race are living, and in particular, the way in which we use fossil fuels. And it is scary, but we don't want to be frightening people for the sake of it. But we do believe that there is a wake-up call. And I'm not suggesting that the wine trade on its own or producing sustainable wine is going to solve all the world's problems. But there's no one industry or no one person or no one government that can actually do it on their own. It's going to be a collective effort. And we wanted to just put that to context and to inspire people, see some of the great things that are being done by certain people and certain companies around the world.
Absolutely. I mean, I was traveling for quite a few months earlier this year doing field research, and I know Jane has seen as well. And it's really inspiring to meet some of these farmers, winemakers who are doing great things out there. I mean, the other thing I'd say is that it's quite hard to be preachy, even if you wanted to, because there aren't easy solutions on these things. It's maybe sort of frustrating in the sense that we're very often led to believe that with consumer capitalism, you can buy a certain product or avoid a certain type of packaging, say, and that everything will be okay. And it's really just much more complicated than that. But that was one of the surprising things to me digging into this subject was ultimately you're talking about the complexity of global supply chains, all sorts of industrial processes associated with packaging and other things as well. And there just isn't a simple answer a lot of the time. It doesn't mean to say you can't make sensible choices as a consumer.
And what would those be? What would be your top sensible choices? Is it that we should be looking for those who farm organically, biodynamically, light bottles? Is it that kind of thing?
Those things, yeah. I mean, it's important to recognize that organic and biodynamic wines are not sustainable. I mean, there's no such thing as this sort of end goal and you tick this box. They are certainly better for the environment. They're certainly better for biodiversity and things. They're usually lower in terms of their carbon emissions as well. So that's a good choice to make. In terms of the packaging, I mean, this is a whole other area. We don't need to get into it right now, but the biggest chunk of a bottle of wine's carbon emissions is just the bottle. It's around 40% on average.
Wow.
But then there's a difference between, say, the heaviest bottles weigh over a kilo, just the bottle. And then there's a group, the Sustainable Wine Roundtable, has got together a bunch of retailers in the UK and in North America, and they're pushing for a new standard lighter bottle of 425 grams.
What is that in pounds, just for those who aren't on the metric system? I'm bad at these conversions, but
425
It's
grams.
probably about a pound.
About a pound, just under a pound.
And then a kilo would be
Kilo is
Pound,
2.2
pounds.
2.2 pounds. Okay, yeah, quite a wide range
At
there.
the top
yeah.
end, I mean, I've come across bottles that are 1.2 kilos. You're talking about really about a third. And that makes a really big difference for carbon. And not just it's the manufacture of the glass, it's also much heavier to transport. You get into these sort of complexities. I think it's fascinating, actually, as well as being sort of scary. That's the reason that glass is such a big deal. So the other thing you can do, if you're buying a regular wine to drink on a weekday night, you're not aiming to cellar it or anything, you can look at wine in cans or in other alternative packaging, like, for instance, a bag in box. That's completely fine. I mean, for ordinary everyday wines, it's absolutely fine. There's no damage to the wine, and it will not go off before you've finished it. Well, at least not rate I drink wine, but
Or those listening to the podcast.
And this is part of the reason people are overwhelmed, whether they're people in the wine trade, whether they're in other industries, whether they're consumers, is that there is no one easy answer. So as Andy says, even organic, biodynamic, conventional farming uses a lot of agrochemicals in whatever it is, not just growing grapes, but any agricultural product uses them. And when those were developed, mainly post Second World War, we believed that what they were doing, it was increasing yields, helping to feed more people, produce more food. We now know the impact that those have on biodiversity, on the amount of sort of life in the soil and therefore the impact on the carbon that's contained within soil, as well as all the emissions that are associated with the producing and shipping those agrochemicals from wherever they're manufactured to where they're applied in the vineyard. There's no one way of saying actually organic is best, conventional farming is best. It really depends on the conditions under which grapes are being grown. But one of the big talking points and trends at the moment is research into what we call regenerative farming, so regenerative viticulture. So that is where people are minimizing inputs in terms of agrochemicals that are going to affect your life in your soil, in essentially trying to retain and keep all the carbon that's in living organisms, that's in organic matter, that's in the soil, just build up your carbon content in the soil. So that's one thing.
Does that net out neutral, regenerative farming? Like, is that what sustainable is?
I think it's part of the answer. But, just like if you farm the grapes regeneratively or organically, that is better for the environment and better for carbon emissions in the vineyard. But if you then put that organic or regeneratively farmed grapes and make it into wine and put it into a very heavyweight glass bottle that you then ship from one side of the planet to the other, because about 50% of the world's global wine production is exported to another country and much of it goes very long distance. That's not sustainable when you look at the overall picture.
Also, that bottle, a lot of bottles are shipped large distances around the world. So, for instance,
empty bottles before packaging.
Yes, exactly. So, for instance, in the American industry, California and so on, a lot of those bottles are actually shipped in from China. So, even before it's filled, your bottle has traveled thousands of miles. There's been a lot of carbon. Then it's filled, and then it's exported, possibly back to China or to Europe.
And is that just economics? Because China will make those bottles cheaper than in the US?
Yeah.
Okay.
Then you get into questions about, there are different levels of emissions according to how you make the bottles as well. Generally, the Chinese factories will not be as efficient as most efficient factories in France, Germany, the UK, for instance.
Right.
You could go on and on and on and on. And I think because, again, it's looking at how efficient each of the glass foundries is, where the energy comes from. So to make a glass bottle from sand, you need to achieve extremely high temperatures. Most furnaces run on natural gas because that's the only way that you can get to those high temperatures. But there's a lot of research going on looking at smaller foundries, electric, ultimately moving to hydrogen-powered furnaces. There's a lot of stuff happening. There's no one single answer.
We went down quite a lot of rabbit holes.
I'll bet. We're going down one right now, but it's fascinating. But what's the most surprising insight you discovered while you were writing the book? Let's start with Andy.
Well, I think for me, it's exactly this sort of stuff which we're discussing about the complexity of global supply chains and about how there are so many industrial processes involved. It's just complicated, and there are carbon emissions and things to consider at every stage. Even though obviously I'm a wine professional, I know a lot about wine, I had never been to a bottle factory before. I hadn't been to a large recycling plant. But I also visited, for instance, one of the world's largest cork factories making corks in Portugal, which is by far the world's largest producer.
What surprised you about the way they're making cork there from the sustainability point of view?
Cork there is no doubt, the most sustainable way. If you're going to use glass bottles, cork is the most sustainable option as a closure.
Oh, over screw caps.
Oh, yeah. Way more.
I didn't know that.
Because
okay.
cork oaks, the actual plants, the trees, they live for 200 years. They themselves, as they grow, store carbon within them. They encourage biodiversity within the cork forests. And then the cork stopper itself, which is essentially the bark of the cork oak that's been punched out, again, is a carbon store. Whereas aluminium screw caps, we all talk about aluminium as being extremely sustainable because it can be recycled. And yes, it can be recycled many times over. But the reality is most screw caps are not recycled because they're just too small and they sort of fall through. They don't get picked up at the recycle plants and they don't get disposed of necessarily in the right way by consumers. But aluminium is extremely energy intensive to produce, particularly if you're talking about primary aluminium, which requires the mining of bauxite, which creates a lot of environmental damage, but is extremely energy intensive as well. Even if aluminium is recycled, and using recycled aluminium uses less energy, but actually because the world is growing, its demand for aluminium is growing for aeroplanes, for cars, for all sorts of other things. The demand for aluminium is increasing. So the more we switch anything into aluminium, the more that then requires energy to be used to extract.
Even if you recycle something for aluminium, I'm not actually sure what the melting point is, but it has to be over 1,000 degrees. So you're talking about furnaces generating enormous amounts of carbon emissions. Even if you're recycling, it's much more carbon intensive if you're crushing up bauxite and smelting, but it's still.
And I don't know if you mentioned this just a while back, but the cork forest, they're also preserving a natural habitat, right? Like the birds and animals and all the rest of it. So
a natural habitat. And the other thing that I don't think many people realise, because there have been some really quite serious wildfires in Portugal as well in recent years, but they act as a natural fire barrier. So with increasing drought, very high temperatures, they act as a natural barrier.
Cork is a natural fire retardant.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? It doesn't burn?
No.
Oh.
Sorry?
So it's a tree that doesn't burn.
Oh, no. Have you ever tried burning a cork? Did you ever know the game Ibble Dibble we used to play at university?
What game have I been missing? What is this game?
Another story for another day, but you singe the end of a cork. If you try and do that, you will find it. The cork does not burn at all. It will blacken and you'll get a sort of charcoaly, when you play Ibble Dibble, if you get it wrong, you had the mark on your face.
I have to say, I've never played this game, but we're not going to get into English drinking games. Just.
Oh, there might be a lot of interest in that. So let's shift to viticulture, growing grapes. In South Africa, it seems to emerge as a leader in your book in biodiversity-focused viticulture. What innovations there impressed you most? Maybe you can pick out a few specific examples at wineries you visited.
The thing to say for a start is that the South Africans are able to do this, or at least the forward-looking producers who want to, partly because of the size of the estates. So, for instance, you can decide to set aside 50 hectares, which is, gosh, what's that in Imperial? 50 hectares is what, over 100 acres, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You can afford to do that, whereas you can't do that in Burgundy, say, or even in Bordeaux.
There's just much more land available in South Africa. Okay.
But when they do that, I mean, they're trying to do various things. I mean, for instance, you can set up wildlife corridors. So if you've got cultivated land, it prevents animals, particularly prey animals, but all animals, they're not keen to cross that land. And particularly in South Africa or in the Western Cape, the natural vegetation before it was cultivated is called fynbos. It's a sort of a Mediterranean sort of scrub and shrubs. There are various people like, for instance, Johan Reneke, who's a biodynamic producer in Stellenbosch. He is joining up some sort of remaining bits of fynbos and rewilding bits to join together these islands into corridors. And elsewhere where they've done this, so for instance, at the Delheim estate, you get animals coming back actually quite quickly, and you get sort of porcupines, you even get Cape leopards. The Cape leopard is highly endangered. It actually helps with the balance of the land because you need predators, and particularly birds, raptors, because they will deal with rodents and snakes and things. It's restoring the natural balance of the land.
And are rodents and snakes eating the vines or something? Are they predatory on the vines?
It's just the ecosystem is out of balance if you've got pests like that.
Sure, not keeping him in check.
And similarly, biodiversity, I mean, you can use, for instance, recreating bits of wetland. So like I can think of one producer where they've done that, and it actually helps have a cooling effect on the vineyard around it because you've got this sort of body of water. You find these sort of unexpected effects when you sort of restore nature to what it was. It's not completely what it was because there's a vineyard there, obviously, but
sure. And of course, vineyards are a monoculture, right? They are very intensive because it's not mixed farming. It's the same vines every year.
There are several things that you've said there. Absolutely. In some of the classical regions, it's monoculture. You walk out and you walk along and you see vines. And and not little else. And if you went back 20 years, probably the vines were all neat and prim and trimmed, and there was no weeds, no cover crops between rows, nothing like that. But even in some of these classical areas, now we've started sowing cover crops. The great thing about vines is that, like fruit trees, orchards, they live for a long time. So vines can live decades and some even longer than that. The roots go very, very far down into the ground. And by creating this biodiversity with the larger sort of mammals and birds and other things, it's just all part of a system. So it starts to also build the insects, all the life in the soil. It becomes a natural, organic, circular economy, if you like. And that helps protect vines against disease. It helps reduce the pressure. Some of these insects actually keep the predators from the vines at bay. So it just becomes a much more resilient system that also captures and retains more carbon within it.
And that sounds idyllic, but is this regenerative viticulture, is it a large-scale solution versus, just great for boutique wineries?
I think people are still testing out and trying to understand how to regeneratively farm vineyards. The idea is that you're building up the carbon content in the soil over time. So it takes time to actually test those soils and do those analyses over years and decades to see whether you're actually achieving it. One thing I would say is that quite often people think that regenerative is a version of organic, but actually the principles of regenerative farming or regenerative agriculture can be used in organic, in biodynamic, or in conventional farming, so that you are still building up this carbon store in the soil. You have got some big companies like O'Neill's in California who have done a lot of work on it.
Jackson Family Estates.
Jackson Family Estates, Torres are doing a lot of experimentation and research on it. So yes, a lot of these things are easier to do on a small scale, but there are people actually looking at how it can be.
I think there's a very current debate at the moment, particularly in the US, around basically how you take regenerative viticulture forward in a way that does actually go beyond just boutique wineries, that actually does it at scale to make a real difference. That was the reason for the O'Neill trial, and I actually visited Paso Robles in California in January this year, and I was there for a briefing that the guys from O'Neill were giving to their sort of reps who dealt with growers, because they'd wanted to do this large scale, it's a 50-acre trial, basically to see if they could do it without it affecting yields and costs too much, so before they would ask their growers to do that. And I mean, O'Neill are a top 10 US producer. I mean, they've got thousands of hectares which are farmed for them by contract growers. Their conclusions were really positive. I mean, they made almost no difference to yields. There might be some small difference in terms of labor costs, but basically it's doable. And Jackson Family Estates, on the same trip, I visited a big field trial they've been running for a few years, actually, and they said very similar things. Now, that's not yet the same thing as putting that into practice, but it's quite encouraging, I think, because absolutely you need to take it beyond being a boutique thing.
Yeah, and you mentioned Tablas Creek in California, which is generating 102% of their energy needs. How are they doing that?
They've got a lot of solar panels, basically.
Okay.
Tablas is really interesting. They were the first vineyard, I think, in the world, certainly in North America, to be certified regenerative. They were already organic and biodynamic. So they do, for instance, your question about the monoculture. When I was there, there were sheep grazing there, looked after by these flock guardians, which were these big dogs, these mastiffs. And they're not just farming vines. And on the energy side, there's these big solar array. They're really proving you can do it. But I mean, it's interesting talking to Jason Haas, the co-owner, who said, you're always looking for basically where you can improve. What can we do better on? So, for instance, I was discussing with him the fact that effectively their emissions from tourism. So tourists driving to go there, obviously they have a big cellar door operation. You need to include those carbon emissions from all these people driving to you in your calculations. And they were pondering how to deal with that.
Just to add to the solar point, you asked earlier, what was one of the most interesting facts that we sort of came across whilst writing this book. Well, this isn't a fact that actually I came across writing the book. It was something that I came across much earlier, which just really struck me. And it is the sun gives enough power in less than an hour to provide the total energy needs of the world for a year.
Wow.
And that is written by a guy called Chris Goodall, who wrote a book called The Switch, which was inspirational for me. So I read that quite a long time ago now, but just showed the impacts that actually switching to renewable energies would have, and actually how achievable it can be.
It's also, I should say, it's doable in less sunny places than California. So, like, I was talking just recently to several English wine producers about who've put in solar power and are managing to generate maybe half of their power that way, which, you know how cloudy it is here a lot of the time.
That's true. Yeah, no, that's fabulous. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed our chat with Andy and Jane. Here are my takeaways. Number 1, how can the wine world tackle climate change, and why is choosing sustainable and biodynamic wines not enough? As Jane explains, there's no doubt that climate change is happening, and she's not suggesting that the wine trade or consumers on their own, or even producing sustainable wine, is going to solve all the world's problems. Though sometimes I personally feel after 3-4 glasses, I could solve world peace. Anyway, it's going to be a collective effort. Andy and Jane wanted to inspire people to see some of the great things that are being done by certain people and companies and wineries around the world. Andy adds there aren't any easy solutions, and we're often led to believe with consumer capitalism that you can buy a certain product or avoid a certain type of packaging and that everything will be okay. And it's really much more complicated than that, because we're talking about the complexity of global supply chains and all sorts of industrial processes associated with packaging and other aspects. But it doesn't mean that you can't make some sensible choices as a consumer. Number 2, what happens when vineyards embrace biodiversity with cover crops, insects, and wildlife? Jane says that in some of the classic wine regions, wine is a monoculture. You walk out and all you see are vines and little else. And if you went back 20 years, the vines were probably all neat, prim and trimmed. There were no weeds, no cover crops. But even in some of these classic areas now, they're starting to sow cover crops between the vineyard rows. And the great thing about vines is that, like fruit trees or orchards, they live for a long time, decades, sometimes even longer. The roots go very far down into the ground, and by creating this biodiversity with the larger mammals and birds, it's all part of the same system. So it starts also to build the insects, and that, of course, leads to more life in the soil. It becomes a natural, organic, circular economy and environment. And this also helps to protect the vines against disease. Some of those insects keep predators of vines at bay. So it becomes a much more resilient ecosystem and also retains more carbon within it. And number 3, how are wine producers in South Africa rebuilding natural ecosystems around their vineyards? So as Andy explains, you can set up wildlife corridors. If you've got cultivated land, it prevents animals, especially prey animals, from crossing because they just don't want to go in those areas. Particularly in South Africa and the Western Cape, the natural vegetation before it was cultivated was called fynbos, and it's a Mediterranean sort of scrub or shrub. Johan Renicky is a biodynamic producer in Stellenbosch, and he rewilded bits of his property to join together these islands into corridors. At Delheim Estate, the animals came back quickly: porcupines, Cape leopards, which are highly endangered. And it also, again, helps with the balance of the land because you need predators, particularly birds and raptors, because they deal with the rodents and snakes. And it's restoring the natural balance of the land. If you missed episode 258, go back and take a listen. I chat about why sustainable wine growing matters with Anna Brittain of the nonprofit organization Napa Green. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
On average, 40 to 50% of emissions from a winery operation, including the vineyard, come from packaging and distribution alone. So boxes, what's in the boxes, and then getting the glass to your facility and shipping that out to your distributors, your retailers, your customers, your wine clubs. That is often half of the entire emissions footprint of a winery. So we work with our members really closely on green packaging. They're not allowed to use styrofoam except for rare exceptions.
Oh, that's good. That stuff's so annoying. It goes all over when you open the box. It's everywhere.
And it can't be recycled, and it has toxic chemicals in it. It ends up in the landfill and it sits there for 1,000 years and it can leach into the groundwater. So got to get rid of the styrofoam.
You won't want to miss next week when we continue our chat with Andy and Jane. If you liked this episode or learned even one teensy-weeny thing from it, please email or tell a friend about the podcast this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in learning more about sustainable wines. It's easy to find the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. Just tell them to search for that title or my name, Natalie McLean Wine, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, their favorite podcast app, or they can listen to the show on my website at nataliemclean.com/podcast. Email me if you have a sip, tip, question, or if you'd like to win one of 5 copies of the books I have to give away. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on this episode, or if you've read my book or are listening to it. In the show notes, you'll find a link to take a free online food and wine pairing class with me called The 5 Wine and Food Pairing Mistakes That Can Ruin Your Dinner and How to Fix Them Forever at nataliemclean.com/class. And that is all in the show notes and more at nataliemclean.com/360. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week, perhaps a wine that is both sustainable and sustains you through an evening. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So subscribe for free now at nataliemclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.